So in my experience, creative teams aren't bad at productivity. They're just using a system that was never designed for them. That same brain that allows someone to be able to think differently, see patterns other people miss, and create bold new ideas is the same brain that ultimately ends up struggling with structure, focus, and a lot of times time management. And then what we end up doing is we give that creative brain things like Slack. We give them notifications, and then we give it constant context switching, and we try to call it productivity. Most productivity systems are built for operational roles and ultimately just not creative ones. So in this video, I'll show you why creative teams fail at time management and the structural shift that actually unlocks consistent output. So let's start with the kind of creative brain paradox. The reality is that what makes a creative person incredibly powerful, but ultimately ends up making them also structurally vulnerable, is that they have a high sensitivity to stimulus. They are non-linear thinkers. They are great deep pattern recognition people, and they have a lot of kind of idea fluency kind of going in and out of them, where it's just like a constant piece. These traits are often linked to ADD and ADHD people and patterns. And here's why I'm bringing this up, is that creative people most often are interest driven. They're not urgency driven. They're looking at, here's the pieces that make my brain tick and have interest to me. They operate really in bursts of energy. But the reality is that focus is finite. So if you're like trying to constantly being able to leverage these bursts of energy, it ends up being incredibly draining. So traditional productivity assumes steady linear attention on a constant basis. And frankly, just the creative attention, generally, this is not true for every single person, but generally speaking, is not linear. And that's actually a feature of you as a creative, not a drawback. It's actually a feature. It's what makes you great at your job. But when you try to fit it into this construct of what we have, society has built as productivity and in linear attention, it actually just doesn't work for you. And so here's the thing that we end up creating is this like productivity lie. So we end up trying to implement these new tools so that we're able to be more productive. And so frankly, Asana doesn't actually create more focus. It creates a framework around the ability to be able to have it, but it actually doesn't create focus. And Notion is not going to do that any better. It doesn't protect your attention. And Slack does not actually increase any output. In fact, it does exactly the opposite in a lot of instances. Tools can organize tasks, but they don't regulate in any respect the cognitive energy that it takes for you to be able to produce the creative work that you're doing. And so then we end up implementing these tools without the structural discipline, and all that we end up doing is creating a lot of noise for the creative team. And so it ends up having us be in this dynamic of busy versus kind of productive, right? Of like, we can be incredibly busy, but don't actually produce a lot more things. And so what ends up happening for creative teams is they may end up responding very quickly. They're checking notifications constantly. They're staying kind of available, if you will, or they end up in back-to-back meetings. And this feels productive, but it actually destroys the deep work capacity that you need in order to do that meaningful creative work. And that deep creative work can rely upon those like uninterrupted stretches of you being able to creatively explore new ideas, for you to be able to cognitively immerse yourself in this concept, in this direction, in this thing that is stimulating you, and being able to actually not have the constant external world stimulus that is causing a lot of friction and ultimately just increasing your cortisol levels and making you incredibly anxious. And frankly, you cannot design exceptional work in these like 10-minute, 3-minute, 4-minute, 20-minute fragments of time that you're giving the attention to it. Where a lot of end up being the case is that creative people end up working a lot late at night if they don't have the right boundary lines around them. So let's understand a component of this constraint. When looking at a lot of creative people, which do tend to be ADHD or ADD, obviously go check yourself out. This is not a diagnosis for you. Go speak with a professional. But creative professionals do not have unlimited focus. I mean, frankly, nobody does. But that limitation is more true for a lot of creative people. These like bursts of energy are incredibly important to understand the dynamic in which you currently work with it. And so there's two schools of thought within this ADD, ADHD mind, creative mind, is that there's a number of hours or a number of amount of things that you can give cognitive attention to, or the same thing in a weekly basis. You either are going to completely extinguish it in a weekly time frame or in a daily time frame. But either way, it is finite, and you need to understand how exactly you're interacting with your own creative energy. And so when you're out of that peak kind of time and focus that you have, you end up having dramatic drop in creative quality. Your execution is going to slow down. Your burnout is going to increase, trying to force against the person that you are. And what I want you to think about is how can you attach your attention and allocate it intentionally so that you don't end up having this like meaningful creative drain. Here's the thing I want you to be thinking about is how do you structure creative teams around what they actually need? And frankly, it's not just more tools, it's actually meaningful structure around them that actually creates for the ability to be able to do things in the right fashion. So how I want you to think about it is based on the person that you are. Am I more number of hours in a day? Am I more of a number of hours in a week? And understanding, how do I actually build into my life, into my work week or into my work day, the right amount of time that allows for me to be able to do these things. And largely each person is a little bit different, whether they are more creatively engaged and active in the mornings or in the afternoons, or maybe it's even a little bit more fluid for you, and that's okay. But just understanding what are the constructs of how you're going to do things. But I would highly recommend that you have kind of these 90-minute kind of focus windows where you're able to kind of turn the world off. Notifications are turned off. Slack is completely closed. You have very minimal interruptions, allowing for you to have these blocks, whether it's 2 of them a day, 1 of them a day, multiple of them of a week, but allow for you to be able to have meaningful time that is unfragmented, focused, allowing for you to have these like moments where you're able to just creatively engage with the work that you're doing. And then focus on, how do you actually do this energy-based scheduling? So when are my peak hours? When am I a bit more strategic? And then what are my administrative pieces that largely do not take a whole lot of my personal energy? However, for those of you that are ADD, ADHD, those administrative hours can actually be more of an energy drain, but separate video. And so I want you to match the task to the energy type of kind of what is it actually going to take, so that you don't put creative work in these low energy windows, so that you're able to do the most amazing possible creative work in the time that you ultimately have, and create meaningful communication boundaries, right? So like, let's say an internal rule that you have is that when you have your headphones in, that means don't interrupt me. That means that you have across the entire creative team defined Slack no response windows, where it's just nobody is allowed to be sending Slack messages, or that notifications are just turned off, and that we don't have the expectation where we are going to get an instant response, so that we don't have that expectation across the team. And availability to other individuals does not actually mean productivity, and we have to understand the distinction between productivity and availability. It's an incredibly important distinction. And then creating discipline around this, right, is that if we're able to, especially for those of you that are ADD and ADHD, the administrative work is an incredible energy drain. So how do we streamline those pieces so it takes less of your attention, so that maybe we can have it be completely automated? Maybe it's something that you don't actually have to do, but if you're spending a lot of time doing administrative work, you as either the founder or of your creative team doing a lot of administrative work, there's a problem with your process, and the process is ultimately broken. So we need to structure your systems to reduce this friction, because it is going to cause a lot of drain across your entire organization, energetically wise and the creative output wise as well. And this is true for you as the creative leader, but also true for your entire team. And so I want you to start to think about, how can you start to leverage these like moments of like decompression, rest, as a meaningful performance tool and not as an indulgence. And so I want you to start to think about a couple of things, right? Is that it is actually part of the creative process, allowing your energy to refill and then allow for you to be able to re-engage with things. As things, at least for me, right, the longer the day goes on, the more things that end up in my head, and it actually creates for me a conscious effort for me to pause, to remove, to slow things down, and allow for me to be able to bring myself back into this current moment. And the reality is that the same thing is true for you, right? It's like this kind of incubation effect, if you will, is that as you insert an idea, it takes a little while for it to be able to like marinate in there. Sometimes ideas just come immediately, but then some of them, it takes a while for it to actually come to fruition, for it to spark an energetic kind of burst in that moment for you. And realize that there's moments that you have to be able to have that meaningful engagement. You have actual meaningful, complete disconnection time that allows for you to rejuvenate yourself as a creative. But there's also the meaningful amount of time that you're doing in a given day, in a given week. Without rest, creative is going to plateau or even just start to decline. And as a reminder that I've spoken about several times, burnout is not from just working hard. It is from a meaningful drain of energy and creating a lot of kind of shallow work that is creating an overstimulated mind for you and creating a lot of cognitive overload. The thing I see happen for a lot of agency leadership that creates for this problem, especially for those of you that are trying to move towards productivity, maybe looking at how do I grow this business meaningfully, is that we end up kind of glorifying busyness. We reward responsiveness. We kind of measure people based on their availability, and we confuse constant motion activity with output, and they're not the same thing. Frankly, the high-performing creative teams are not always on. They have a structure around them that actually creates for meaningful output. So they are working more on the schedule based on that specific individual, knowing that there's uniqueness to that individual. They are protecting focus across the team. They're building systems that support the creative process, and they're creating for meaningful space for inspiration. And And frankly, inspiration does actually favor structure. And I know that structure is not something that as a creative person you tend to lean into. It's just not. Me being married to a creative, it's not something that you innately move towards. But the more structure that you have around you, the more boundaries that you actually have to protect that creative time, it's really truly meaningful and allows for you to be the best possible creative that you possibly can be. And creating this like meaningful understanding of how do you understand and check in with yourself, understanding your cognitive overload, your energy allocation, your discipline around how you're protecting yourself, and that structural protection for not only for you, but also for the team. Creative teams honestly, I don't see them failing on productivity. They fail at protecting attention. And that attention really needs a reset, and it is a meaningful asset across your team. And making sure that you're protecting it is incredibly vital. Creative teams don't fail at productivity because they lack tools. They fail because there's no structure protecting their attention. But even if individuals manage their energy properly, performance still collapses if the agency's delivery systems create chaos, because deep work cannot survive inside broken infrastructure. So next, go watch the delivery infrastructure successful agencies use. It's going to show you how high-performing agencies design their operations to support consistent creative output.